It's no mystery that modern heavy guitar tones are some of the most satisfying to play through. And if there's one guitar player who's helped pave the way for how they've evolved, it's Metallica's James Hetfield. Even as guitarists get better and better every single day at dialing in some of the best guitar tones we've ever heard, there's still so much to learn about how this guy conducts this much energy through wood and wire. For over 40 years, he's defined what tight, heavy rhythm guitar is supposed to sound like, and somehow, even after the Black Album, his tone just keeps getting better and better. So in part 2 of this series, after spending most of my life recording music, playing guitar, and studying the sound of Metallica, I'm going to share with you what I've learned about the modern era of James Hetfield's tone, how to get closer at capturing that feel, and find inspiration in playing music, whether you're a fan of Metallica or not. Let's go. What's up everybody, how's it going? I'm Brad Dollar, welcome to the channel, it's great to see you. Alright, I just want to give everybody a huge thanks that watched the first video, weighed in, and added a ton of extra history and context and information. It means a lot to me to have you here, and to help fill in some of those gaps on James Hetfield's tone. So I just want to take a moment and add a little extra clarity to the classic era, which I think will help make the modern era make that much more sense to you. And the best part is that the actual masterclass on James Hetfield's tone is out there. Fleming Rasmussen just put out a brand new course on how to dial in the tone of Master of Puppets. Not just on guitar, but I think it's across the whole record. It's how to really bring all of that to life. So the information's out there for the super deep dive, and I'll be going deeper into that rabbit hole myself, and I'm super excited to learn and share some of that with you as well. But in the meantime, this series is a great way to kick off that journey into learning more about his tone so that you can discover your own. All right, let's talk about his classic pickups really quick. I mentioned that before he made the switch to active EMGs, his passive pickup choice was similar to like a Gibson 490. That's the pickup that's in my brain for like the most standard Gibson stock pickup of the last 20 or 30 years. It's in so many guitars. That's why I referenced that. I just meant like a stock style pickup. Now the reality is he actually used Gibson Dirty Fingers pickups as well as Seymour Duncan Invaders, both of which are like a very high output pickup. Definitely a more high output sound than a Gibson 490. But if all you can get your hands on are stock humbuckers, like whatever's in your guitar, you're totally fine. The main point with that is try not to use single coil style pickups. And at least if you're just working with stock humbuckers or working with whatever humbuckers are in your guitar, whatever passive style, you're definitely on the right path. And regardless, if I was going to pick any James Hetfield style pickup for the classic era, it would be an EMG anyways. And then lastly, to put a bow in the classic era, and then we'll move on. My apologies, I can't believe I blew past this in part 1. But cabinets, the type of speaker, all of that definitely matters. If you just pick a vintage 30 and you put it in a 4x12, you're most of the way there. You know, it's gotta be some version of that combination. Greenbacks, though they sound awesome, aren't really gonna cut it. 2x12 cabinet will get you close, but something about it is missing. It's really gotta be a 4x12 cabinet with a vintage 30, whether you get a real cab or you're just using an impulse response. But other than that, that's it. That's the bow on part 1 of the classic era. If you haven't already watched that, go check it out now, and let's keep going. As we talked about in part 1, James Hetfield is notorious for his down picking technique. It's a huge part of the sound, from how he's holding it, which makes a big difference, especially in the way you palm mute things, to as how someone put it on here, which I thought was really awesome, has become like a pocket strummer, where he's down picking the most critical stuff, but then quickly up picking the adjacent notes that are keeping the flow, keeping the rhythm going. I read some more in an article many years ago, I'm not sure if it was with James Hetfield or Kirk Hammett, but they deploy what they call like economy of motion. So they're definitely trying to maximize as much of their hand movement, whether it's their left or their right, their picking hands, with every moment that passes. So to really lock your picking style into one that feels like his, the easiest way that I can explain it is just try to play as many down pick notes as you feel comfortable doing. Trying to force it never sounds good, so just try to put it in every natural place that you can. If you have to gallop or upstroke or switch to a strum or change your pattern, like do that. Maybe you would want to force it for, you know, a Master of Puppets recreation or Injustice for All, but in the modern era, there's just a little more room to play with. It's still just as tight, but you have more room to alternate with those different patterns. Now for picks, this is one part that actually has changed over the years. For the longest time, he was known for pretty much exclusively using a Dunlop Tordex style pick, 88mm green in his right hand for the better part of 20 years. And then somewhere along the line, like, you know, a decade or so ago, the new style of James Hetfield custom picks came along. Starting with the black fang and then recently moving over to the white fangs. And all 3 of these picks are super different. All right, first up, let's take a look at the classic Tordex style pick that he used. Now, yeah, I happen to have a real Metallica pick from this era of this version, and I got it at the Fillmore St. Anger release shows they did in 2003. I went to the May 21st show. You know, they were throwing out picks. One came sailing at me, hit the floor in front of me. I picked it up, and that's the one I have here. So I don't think he used it because it's brand new. I'm pretty sure this is just on the pick holder, but it's still one of the ones that he was using from that era. So we have an exact look at it. You can see it's just a standard Dunlop Tortex pick. There's nothing crazy about it. There's nothing wild about it. This is just like a standard Tortex pick. No big surprises there, we know that. And then in 2010, he moved to the Black Fang style pick from Dunlop. I have one of those here as well. Now what's interesting about this pick is it changes in 2 or 3 subtle ways. The first is that it's a little thinner. This is a 0.73 versus the classic 0.88. Probably speaking to that picking style of like a little more strumming, a little more like back and forth in that pocket. And then it's also got a much sharper point. Overall, they're basically the same size. If anything, the Black Fang feels a little smaller in your hand, but when you look at it, it looks beefy. I think what's nice about it is that it holds a little flatter against your thumb than maybe the Tortex does, but it's basically the same pick with just a little bit of sharpness to it. And then last but not least, now we've moved on to the Hetfield White Fang. And in terms of picks, this is definitely the most radical change from either of these two. So here it is. Now, if the classic Tortex 88mm and the Black Fang were just a little bit different, the White Fang is really different. It's heavier. It feels a little wider in the middle, it's sharper, and it's got a little bit of that grippy texture. Not the Tortex stuff that fades off. These are like the actual like raised dots you see on some of the nylon style picks. This is that, just not as annoying and a lot more reduced. It actually feels pretty good. I got these just for this video, so I'm excited to try them out, but just judging by how stiff they are, this would definitely make me play a little bit different. This would definitely make me play a little tighter, and at the very least, heavier picks like this lock you into whatever you're playing. So the pick really stops where you stop versus, thinner picks. I always feel like they kind of just keep sliding after you're done, like there's still some motion left in them. So it's nice that this can really just help you stop on a dime if you want. So if you want to get a little closer to the feel that's on Hardwired to Self-Destruct and is on 72 Seasons, then try one of his newer style picks, either the Black Fang or the White Fang, and try to focus your right hand on economy of motion, where you're applying down picking as much as you can, but also leaning into gallops and strums to help pull off riffs a little cleaner. All right, let's talk about pickups. In the classic era, we talked about how he evolved from passive to active EMG style pickups. That move definitely helped shape modern heavy guitar tones. And it gave everyone a little more permission to be a little more extreme with things, moving as far away as possible from anything that resembled the rock and metal from the previous decades. They've spent a lot of energy in recent years reclaiming some of their classic thrash roots. And as a result, there's a gradual move back to a more passive vibe. And the cool thing about this move happening now is how far technology's come. And so now you can go get the AMG JH headset, which is still an active pickup, but it's voiced a little more like a classic passive pickup. I don't want to say it's just a louder and heavier PAF, but kind of where it comes from. And if you look at a lot of the footage from the making of the last few records, you can see him using Les Pauls a lot more often. And so it makes sense that he would move towards this world where he could blend the two together. Active pickups still have an advantage when it comes to heavy tones, heavy guitars. They just push everything a little harder and in a certain way that just makes everything wake up equally. Kind of like a dynamic microphone compared to a condenser microphone. But passive pickups, just like dynamic mics, offer a lot of low-end thump, focused mids, and a ton of realism that we actually need to hear as listeners. So in terms of pickups now in this modern era, finding a blend of both is that gateway to getting the current James Hetfield tone. Whether you go straight for the JH headset and plug that into one of your guitars, or just take the rest of these elements and then plug an Invader into your guitar and find your blend that way. There's really no wrong answers, especially because it's currently still exploring his tone and finding what that means to him.
I don't know if you can get my exact sound. I'm still looking for it.
But for that modern tone to really work, I think leaning into a current pickup, a newer style pickup like the JH headset, will get you most of the way there. Or because the classic era is so important to them right now and probably forever, you can just stick with the EMGs. He's still playing a ton of guitars with EMGs. Those haven't gone anywhere. That sound hasn't gone anywhere. But if you want to keep staying on that cutting edge of his tone and keep evolving with him, then leaning into that new voicing style of passive and active being combined is the way to go. So that's his pickups. Before we get too far, if you like this video, it would mean a lot to me if you can subscribe and like. It does a ton to make videos like this possible and bring them to more people just like yourself. So thanks a ton for doing that. Let's keep going. Just like in part one, I still don't think the guitar itself, compared to all these other components, is as critical as we may think. The one caveat to the modern era though, is the introduction of guitars that could really handle the full range of the Metallica catalog, for both their standard tuning and all the songs that feature drop tuning. Whether that's his use of the ESP LTD-H series on St. Anger, the classic baritone Grinch he played for a long time, or these days the super heavy-duty Snakebite Explorer that they make, which seems to sound great whether it's set for standard or he pulls one out that's tuned down. In the modern era, having a guitar or a pair of guitars that will allow you to play in these different tunings, still have it sound good, and not just totally wreck your instrument in the process, I think is a big part about being equipped to recreate and play through that modern tone. One of the coolest things that's changed and actually is a little bit different, or some would argue maybe a lot different, is the overall amp setup he's currently using. So on the studio side of things, one of the biggest things that evolves and comes forward in the modern era is his use of the Diesel VH4. It makes heavy tones that feel modern but don't get lost very accessible. The great thing about the Diesel amps is there are a bunch of amp sims out there now, a bunch of models and things you can access and get that sound really easily. And they've also come really far down in price on the used market. If you watch the making of Hardwired to Self-Destruct especially, you can see the Diesel behind him at pretty much like every time they go into the room to play together. That thing is always there, and I know he's using it in conjunction with a few other things, but that really has become a central part of his tone. So for the modern era, the way to think about this is to remove that Marshall voicing I talked about in the first part of this video series, where you want to blend a Mesa and a Marshall together. I would lose that and replace that with a Diesel. And in terms of the Mesa that you're filling in the gap, I wouldn't use a rectifier. I would go right for the Mark II C+ style amp for a couple reasons. One, that amp style, as I mentioned earlier, is becoming more and more accessible. Now with the reissue of that amp, we're going to have access to those tones. It's going to be easier to hear models of them. They're going to be out there. People are going to make them. It's going to be awesome. I'm very excited. But specifically to James Hetfield and the current modern era, he's pulled the Crunchberry's Mark II C++, that's his, that's on Master of Puppets, that's on all these classic records. He's pulled it out of storage, out of retirement, wherever it was at, and it is being used in all these recordings. You can see it in a ton of the footage whenever he's tracking rhythm, and it's a big part of it. So if I was gonna pick two amps to get that current James Hetfield sound, it's gonna be those two. It's gonna be the Diesel and a Mesa Mark II C+ style. Don't get me wrong, there's still some of that Marshall backbone in there. So it's not like it's totally out of the equation. It's just that the blend or the focus of it is a lot different in the modern era. For more on the current approach on this, check out the Tone Talk episode with Greg Fiddleman, where he talks about them resurrecting James's Jose Modern Marshall. And in a lot of the footage for the recording of Hardwired and Death Magnetic, you can see him using a Wizard amp, which is definitely a Marshall-inspired amp. I think the one he's using is a 100-watt Modern Classic head. So don't rule it out or stop using it altogether, but don't let it anger the tone you're creating as much. Aim for that Mark II C+ and Diesel combination with a little bit of Marshall blended in, probably like a little up the center. So if you're looking for a place to start, that's where you should go. And one more thing about his amps that I've been thinking about a lot is that when you go to see Metallica live, if you've gone to see them anytime over the last 5 years, you've gone to see them and they've been playing through Axe Effects and Matrix power amps. What's cool about this is when they're grabbing the tones, they're grabbing the tones while they're tracking. So while the Diesel is hooked up and mic'd up and everything is dialed in and sounds awesome, while the Crunchberry's Mark II C++ is mic'd up and dialed in and everything sounds great. It's when they're grabbing those fractal impulse responses. And that tells me one really important thing that I think will help all of us make music with whatever we have. And that's if James Hetfield is good with using a fractal Axe Effects live in front of all of us to achieve tones that feel good to him and will translate to us and feel like the songs we know, that's good enough for me. It's definitely reassurance that you can get great sounds with these digital devices. And whether you're using an Axe Effects or a Neural DSP Quad Cortex or a Kemper, you can pull these tones up, get them dialed in, and it won't just sound classic, it won't just sound like Metallica, it'll sound fresh, it'll sound current. It's never been easier or more accessible to blend these styles of amps and these styles of tones together to really create something that sounds like him, feels like him, and hopefully inspires new playing from you. In terms of clean amp setup, it's basically the same as it's always been. The heart of it really is that Roland JC120 Jazz Chorus. And last but not least, it's also worth talking about cabinets. I think for a lot of guitar players, almost any speaker is going to work with their sound, but for James Hetfield, it's gotta be something like a vintage 30. And honestly, it's gotta be a vintage 30 in a 4x12 cab, whether it's the classic or the modern era. Like a 1x12 sound, a 2x12 sound, like that's not James Hetfield. Even though like in person that sounds big, and it would to anybody else that sounds huge, it just doesn't have that full push of air that you get from a 4x12 that we associate with his tone. The great thing about cabinets, especially when it comes to amp modelers, is that impulse responses are really easy to obtain. Plug a different one in, see what that sounds like, try different versions of the Vintage 30, see what you like. But you definitely want a 4x12 style cabinet with the Vintage 30 in it, and you'll be almost all the way there, especially if you pair it with these amps. All right, let's talk about effects. This is one of the things that's actually very consistent from the classic era, and that it's still pretty much a dry guitar sound. Dry is still the fast path to making it sound like him. The moments he does use delay now are definitely more present and a little louder. And he has definitely had effects in his rack before, not to mention just all the effects that are in the Axe Effects units. So they're present, and I can't imagine that he doesn't play with them in the current era a little bit, but in terms of his actual tone, it's not a part of it. You don't need to worry about having delay or reverb on it. You don't need to worry about having like an envelope filter. You don't need to worry about having like a flanger. Like, you don't really need anything. You just need to focus on the amp setup, how they're dialed in, all these other components more so than that. It's just a dry guitar sound, and unless you want to emulate that stadium feel for your own playing, like, you know, you're playing the M72 tour, then just leave it off and keep a very dry guitar sound, and you'll be right there in James Hetfield land. Now, the tone of any guitar player would not be complete without talking about the recording chain that captures them. The microphones, preamps, compressors, cables, converters, all of the stuff that goes in to actually taking what's happening at an amplifier and making something that we can all listen back to and enjoy for many years to come. The good news is that I think this is actually one of the easiest parts of the James Hetfield guitar tone signal chain to achieve. There's never been an easier time to use either the same gear or emulations of the same stuff that was used to make these records. The whole chain is out there, and these days plugins sound so good. They sound so close to the real thing. They're only missing a little bit of the magic. And when you stack them all together, they really do help recordings come to life. So if you take this whole list, you plug it into your DAW, even if all you have is something simple like a Universal Audio Apollo, you can put the same recording signal chain on your tracks and dial in that really critical last 10% that comes from the recording process. In terms of microphones, an SM57 is definitely part of it. 421s, SM7s, U87s, and even Royer 121s have been used to capture James's guitar tone. So when you mic things up, I would advise you to make selections and make choices that allow you to capture as much of that full frequency as possible. Unless you have a specific sound where you want it to sound thin and you know you're not going to need the lows, or you're not going to need the highs in the final version, try to capture the full frequency of something. That doesn't mean don't EQ it, that doesn't mean not shape it. I just mean try to grab the full body of the tone. Royer 121 on a heavy guitar is a little cloudy by itself. It sounds cool, it sounds awesome and thick, and the low end sounds great, but it's missing all that top end, that mid-range crunch. So blending something like that with a 57 or a U87 or all three together really creates that full frequency punch that moves air and makes things sound just more modern. Modern sounds are full frequency. They sort of have all of it at once, or at least the perception of it, versus like, you know, a 70s or a 60s recording. You almost can hear the band pass happening. You can hear, like, you know, the lows and highs go away and the mid-range just pop forward. So for modern sounds, especially for guitars, we want to try to capture a full frequency range as full as possible that works in context of the music that we're making. And just knowing us as guitar players, and we're bound to change our minds, it's never a bad idea to record a DI of your guitar while you're tracking. I personally think it should be post effects. Like if you have effects pedals, it should be after that, so it captures any performance you may be doing with those. But it's totally okay to grab it at the very front, so it's super dry and flat, there's nothing on it, and you can use that later for reamping. And if that's what you're already doing because you're not using amps, then you're good to go. In terms of the DI itself, the Countryman is a staple and is probably what they have used in the studio. It's just one of the most widely available DIs over the last 30 to 40 years. But I would personally recommend the LR Baggs Para DI. It's got a built-in preamp, a little bit of EQ, and even though I usually just leave it flat, it just has a lot of juice and character to it. And for me, I'm always looking to add character to things. I don't like things to be super neutral and sterile. So even a DI, which is supposed to be that way, I just wanted to have a little bit of flavor. So I would highly recommend the LR Baggs Para DI. They work with Phantom Power. They're a great price. You can get them used. They've been around forever. They're rock solid, and they fill this role very nicely. So highly recommend that for a DI. And so that's a look at the recording gear and the process that you need to pull all of this together and capture and record and share what you're making with these tones. Please, I beg of you, make music with this stuff. If you're watching this video and you're serious about dialing in your tone and you're making stuff, just make some music, put it out. It does wonders for the world. It does wonders for yourself. I really hope you share that with people. So thank you for doing that. I hope any of this helps you to make that possible. Now, when it comes to James's tone, layering is still a big part of it, especially for the recorded versions of their songs. The guitars are still layered, they're still thick, there's a wall of sound always coming off any Metallica song that's being made. But the biggest difference is the rise of Rob Trujillo's playing in Metallica. Yes, in the mix, but also just in its presence in the arrangement. Rob's bass really fills in this mid-range and this low-end chunk that we used to get from 4 or 5 guitars being layered all at once. So though I think layering is still a big part of the sound, it's not as critical. What is though is that presence of bass, is that presence of something else to fill in that gap. So if you're working on your own tracks and you want to bring his modern tone into what you're doing, just make sure you've got like that great Rob Trujillo modern rock bass present and happening. Even if you like fake it with another guitar part, the main thing is not layering so much of the same guitar over and over again that we would have heard on And Justice for All or the Black Album. But you can get away with just a double versus a triplicate or quadruple of the same guitar part. And if at any moment you want to bring a little more of that classic feel in, then yeah, just add in one more layer and you'll be there. All right, here's some quick tips that puts the modern era all together so you can do this at home or on the stage or wherever you're making music. In terms of picking technique, we're still going to lean heavy into down picking. Down picking is still the king. However, we're going to think in more of an economy of motion mindset and not be afraid to lean into quick gallops, quick strums, and not force so much of the part we're playing with our right hand to come through on exclusive downstrokes. And in terms of picks themselves, gravitate towards his newer style White Fang pick because it's a blend of a few different kinds of picks. For pickups in the modern era, because he's entered a world where there's this blend of active and passive happening all the time, going straight for something like the JH headset is probably your best bet. Or just stick with the James Hetfield EMG 60 in the neck, 80 in the bridge and call it a day. He still uses those guitars. It's totally okay just to stick with that and you're still going to have that modern feel to your tone. And if anything, it'll help you do the classic era a little easier. For amps and cabs, we're going to embrace the world of amp sims and modelers and units like the Fractal Axe and the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. We're going to embrace the use of those. That said, if you want to cut to the heart of it and get the real thing, we're also in like one of the best eras where there are reissues and you can get the real thing a lot easier than before. So to mimic his current amp setup, the best thing you can do is get a diesel style amp like a VH4 and a Mesa Mark II C+ style amp. Stack a Roland JC120 Jazz Chorus next to it, also amp sim or real thing, and you've got access to a palette of tones that spans 40 years. These combos aren't going to sound bad. It's definitely going to take a little bit of time to dial them in. You're going to want to make sure you cut things when you need to and add them back when it's appropriate, and to think in the whole context of the mix or the song that you're working on. But if you start with the blend of those two plus the Roland Jazz Chorus, you're going to be 90% of the way there. And it's going to sound awesome. You're going to feel great. And if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. For effects, we're still keeping it dry, but if there's anything you wanted to play with, adding a little bit of like stadium style reverb to your guitar sound, if you're trying to feel like something that you've heard from the 72 Seasons Tour live recordings. It's not uncommon to hear James Hetfield's guitar in a stadium coming from a huge PA with that big reverb happening behind it. Now, obviously, in a stadium, they're not adding reverb to that sound. That's just the sound of the physical space. But if you want to mimic that and get that feel, maybe just sneak a little bit in just for funsies. It's not like reverb is part of his tone, but playing in stadiums, playing to huge amounts of people is part of the Metallica discography, the pathway, the experience. So if you want to embody a little bit of that, it's not a bad way to do it. So I wouldn't recommend, hitting the amp with the delay or reverb or anything like that. I would use an aux in and an aux return, go to those effects and then blend them back in with the overall tone so that you actually have control and you can just tuck it in real light. So that's how I would do that. But overall for effects, just keep it dry. And then in terms of recording gear, as always, use what you've got. But the best part about all the preamps and compressors and EQs and consoles that they've used over the years is that emulations of them are super accessible and very affordable. For guitars, I would keep the chain really simple. Some kind of Neve style preamp like a Neve 1073, an SSL console emulation, use some of the EQ in that console emulation, and then go to something like the UAD ATR 102 or their Studer A800 tape emulation, which will give you a full signal chain, basically from preamp to the final recording device. So when you have all of that downstream, I mean, if you have the real thing, if you can plug into all of that, like yes, that's gonna sound awesome. But if you at least have all of that downstream in plugin format, from, you know, the mics you set up and everything that's going, or, you know, if you have an Axe-Fx and you just, you know, plug DI into your interface, if you have all this downstream from that, it's really going to help. To see this in action, stick around for part 3 and I'll walk you through how to set this up and try to dial these things in as close as I can using what I've got. And of course, capture a DI with your recordings so that you have the option later to go back and reamp if you want to. And last but not least, we talked about layering as still being an important part of it, but it's less so than the classic era. So if you're recording all of this and you're putting all this together for your songs, you're layering your guitars back up, you really only need to double them instead of, you know, quadrupling them like from earlier records from the classic era. As soon as you start playing and really get in front of it, it'll all make sense. You're gonna understand it here right away where things need to change, where mids need to be scooped, where mics need to be moved, or distortion needs to be added, or where you just need to go ahead and break the bank and get the real Mark II C++ for your setup. And the most important part of all of this is that you get out there and you start playing with it. All right, so let's wrap it up. The main part that I want you to take away from his evolution of tone in the modern era is that it's this blend of everything that he's learned from the classic era, all the wisdom gained, all of the tone development and storytelling that he's done with his guitar sound being morphed and set up for success to go into the future. They know we love Master of Puppets and Injustice for All. They know we love how those guitars sound. And so the current approach is about blending that classic world, but letting it inspire something new. And that's the main thing that I think James Hetfield and Metallica at least brings to me and brings to all of us, is it helps inspire something new to come out of us. The fact that any band can do that with music for as long as they have is worthy of paying attention to and trying to figure out how it happens, which is why we're here and why I'm super excited that you've watched this video, made it this far, because I really hope that it helps you to do that for your music and your guitar playing. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I'm super glad you're here. Definitely stick around for part 3. We'll put all of this together. And even though I don't have any of the same gear as James Hetfield, I'll use what I've got and we'll see how close I can get. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the modern era, what you think one of his best newer guitar tones is, and what you've learned along the way about bringing his tone to life. Please be sure to subscribe, like, check out the store and the memberships that are going on, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.